So Rome embodies the essence of the West. Within her tradition lies the historical development of the West, enduring as least as it exists within Rome. And I stress this. The salvation of the West lies solely in Rome, for there is no God outside of Rome. The twilight we experience in these terrible times has lingered for centuries, not just as a metaphor, but as a stark reality, because the West resides in a prolonged twilight between the brilliant zenith and the looming night, just like all tradition. If this twilight has persisted for so long, of course we must look to the rising sun, from which the same West has drawn its rationale and strength twice. The East has a symbol here. We're talking a metaphysical place, not a geographical one, but this is the same meaning. First, we have the foundation of Rome through Aeneas, and later through the new tradition in Christ. These are pivotal points of light upon which the spirit of Rome relies, and all of our history can be understood through a steady reference to these two focal points of creative consistency. They were power-making places converging in Rome, also in a physical sense, of course. History is, of course, shaped not by human hands, but by divine power, a truth often overlooked. Where individuals believe they are most active, they are in fact being acted upon in the strict Latin sense of the term, especially when their drive for autonomy and originality misinterprets sacred and traditional impulses. This really happens all the time. You can actually see in politics. People are excited about specific outcomes and think that now always the better thing is going to come. It's not, right? The fact that a system is collapsing, for example, and somebody tries to run it incompetently and gets busted, does not mean that the people who obviously correct their mistakes are actually capable of doing even better than those, right? And if anything, they're mostly like all the reflection of the other, exactly because we're not separated in a physical sense, and we mutually influence each other anyway. So a single person's fault is also at the same time a collective fault, right? True action must reconnect, of course, with the principles that provide measure, value, and efficacy, which are hardly even looked upon like in a strategic sense. In, for example, the definition of an objective, right? There are false promises and just, wishful thinking most of the times. The truth, which belongs to an entirely divine order, always remember the doctrine of the two natures, and that our own is the lower one, continuously degenerating, and the higher one, the divine one, is truly perennial in nature. In fact, always prevails, right? Especially when it manifests through its own intrinsic light, often in unexpected contexts, and even through individuals who are at least prepared to grasp it. One might venture to suggest, albeit at the risk of alarming the naive, that words possess an inherent spirit that unveils their deeper meanings, right? There is a sense of primigenial purity that is truly contained, for example, in the word ingenus. We talked about this in the Indo-European root of the Romano-Italic world. You have many profound truths articulated by those who are unaware of their significance as well, which is also that way I used before to say that truth does manifest also in the errors and in the horrors of the world. In fact, significant errors are often disclosed to those who consciously understand their works in a converse fashion. There exists a critical juncture where truth and error occupy an equal footing, right, thereby nullifying each other. Within each resides what the other lacks, right, in the higher order. To clarify this apparent confusion, one must assert that error is merely truth itself seen in part, meaning their relationship reflects that of a part to the whole, right? It's just like evil is lack of good, right? There isn't another force that, immediately manifests itself as pure evil. Everything is baked into it. Original sin is a metaphysical condition, and it informs this lower nature. Going back to the one means to correct, to straighten up what exists here, not to destroy it, which is a sin in itself. It's a wasted power. It's a wasted life. At times, however, our way to do so does pass, and this, I think, is pretty eloquent from a civilizational point of view, also in the expansion of Rome, and even in the rise of Christianity, that intertwine in that sense true bloodshed and true destruction, but only when this is able to spur a greater force, when it is capable of elevating, like tipping the balance of that metaphysical alchemy, right? Our individual and collective elevation. When we examine history, we must acknowledge that nothing accomplished by humanity is outside the absolute will of God. None of it. Everything exists in a deeper sense, even in the lower nature. Yes, it is also true that only those who act in concert with God to fulfill his desires can be deemed truly autonomous, because the one cannot exist, as we just said, without the other, right? There is no accomplishment, there is no value in the work without divine grace, right? Read what Krishna says to Arjuna regarding the ultimate goal of existence in the Mahabharata. This principle helps clarify the foundation of historical sanctions, why some peoples rise, others fall, and why at the same time things do take an overall turn that involves all of these actors. Genuine history involves the continual reference of events to their divine order. That's why Schwerpunkt is the way it is, but that's why I intertwine this religious and traditional history into historical vision, because it is the ultimate meaning of any historical event. History does not study isolated phenomena, right? It's impossible in a strictly moral and scientific sense to start studying something simply saying, well, but I just studied because it's confined within a space. Well, how do you tell the history of the origins, for example? As a military historian, you have to explain why a war is fought, and the enmity, the conflict, the will behind the actors, something that goes back. If anything, everybody has an ancestor. Everything comes as a burden. It's not just like the contingency of a moment. And pretending otherwise, in fact, is also the responsibilizing individuals, which is constantly the way they do through history, thinking that it's always somebody else's fault, not to see that it's their own. And it's simultaneously the fault of the carnifex and the victim. Because where do you draw a line, right? If anything, for your own incolumity, where do you stop caring about yourself and improving to be stronger, to be more powerful, to be ever less defeatable? That's history in a nutshell. This dual condition, if you want to call it in this way, is particularly evident in the history of Rome, of course, when considered within her eternal function, that is truly the perennial source of true power, which remains unblemished and unwavering, even when external circumstances suggest otherwise. Think about this phoenix-like capacity. In a truly Catholic sense, not in a regional one merely. You have the Roman Empire, you have the Holy Roman Empire, you have in this Christendom itself. You have Rome. I explained this in a recent video commentary on the historian's craft. Western dimension that is informed by Rome, even when we see other actors in the age of nations accomplishing world domination. Think about Europeans during the 19th century. You cannot simply say, again, it's Rome. This is not a paradoxed game, which color, like the land has, and you decide who is the protagonist. This is a spiritual information. You cannot talk about Gaul and modern France without realizing what Rome did to that. The same goes for Britain, the same goes for Germany, the same goes for any country that bears, still today, from the United States to Russia and beyond, the very symbols of Romanity, regardless of, in fact, the shortcomings, of course, from Rome. Is basically the main line there, but also the difference between all these, and reflecting on why that is the case. Like, that is a massive elephant in the room. If you're just concerned about symbols and, say, institutions and representation, be aware that Rome left a mark that no other empire left in the history of the world. It's not like China did or India did, right? There is no trace of that, right? Rome took all over. And this from times largely also that superseded the same, say, what we conventionally think to the Roman Empire. This started from medieval times, and also largely to a Christian age, right? And you understand how complex this topic is, but how many other videos we can in fact make on the same. You can argue that the existence of the West is indebted to Rome. Can you really define any other power that had that foundational capacity of defining the West? Again, you can't quite say Athens. You can't quite say Jerusalem. Like, there is so much of those that constitute pillars that are, however, comprehended into Romanity. It can be said at many levels, even banally speaking, the Byzantine Empire was essentially an Hellenic thing. There is no doubt about this. In an ethnic, cultural essence, the same Israel today is an offshoot of the West. You cannot see at these centers and say, well, we're basically talking about like I don't know, like different things that spread on their own and sort of kept going on their own, and they're just that one, and maybe just they cumulate with one another in a separated way. All this was done under the aegis of Rome, right? And there is no other time. There's not like there's been an Hellenic empire that controlled Rome, or not even the Byzantine one, as a matter of fact, especially in the age of, I mean, essentially in Christianity, of course, because it wasn't any Byzantine before, but I mean, you know what Rome was, what the separation between church and state, that people think it's something from, I don't know, 200 years ago. It is literally foundational in the Gospels, right? And so it's not the same thing. Rome is something else on its own that managed to rule spiritually, also where there was no formal temporal recognition. The same goes for Jerusalem. And it's not like, you know, these cultures did not heavily inform in turn also the West. That's not the point that I'm making. The point is that Rome has an overarching capacity that transcends these all, in at least in a hierarchical sense. The existence of the West is indebted to Rome because no enduring holy or sacred achievement can take place there that is not for and within Rome in all our history. Rome's durability, presence, and essential role in the development of the West, alongside her constancy throughout a vast array of events, that is, as we know, triumphs, declines, collapses, and resurrections, more importantly, I would say. Her persistent emergence during the West's most pivotal moments, her universal role, and her formidable vitality, continuously revitalized by the Spirit of God, the Holy Ghost, the Imperium, the Nika, the Victoria, all reveal what Rome genuinely represents. She is, in essence, the East of the West, the rising sun of the West. One could make some specific historical examples here, but one point that I would like to stress is that Rome is vibrantly containing that legacy still today. There are places that you travel to and that are amazing in their own legacy. I would think that every place in the world has something that another, say, doesn't have. When it comes to Rome, it's difficult to make the case in a metaphysical sense, but Romanity, even just from speaking at our lower natural level, is exuding from the city, or from the earthly city of Rome, that is also at the same time, of course, the heavenly city of Rome. It's a place that I do not know in any other, like, this is not about me not knowing, this is obviously a rhetorical expression by saying that there is no such thing like anything minimally comparable by any exponential scale to what Rome is, even just strictly from a cultural legacy, historical, archaeological point of view. It's not a city like the others. Like, I know that many people travel to Rome, visit Rome, do so in the sense of, okay, well, it's a major Western capital, especially loaded, in fact, in historical legacy, and it's an enjoyable place regardless of issues that really are contingent to just our contemporary world. But let's say where is, like any other part of the world, where at every single step there is not just one, I don't know, big monument that you can say, oh wow, that's definitely impressive. No. We're talking about literally everything in the soil, in the air, in the light, in the landscape. At every step of the way, there is a church, there is some hidden treasure underground, there is a particular visual, there is an architecture, there is a vestige of the past, there is an ancient, a medieval, a modern, a contemporary work of art. This never ends. The palaces of Rome, people go to Rome, of course, like they would at least know that there is the St. Peter, the Colosseum, the altar of the fatherland, there is Castel Sant'Angelo, there are all the, of course, in parallel, like the Vatican museums, the Roman National Museum, and more, and beyond, the various parks, whatever. But this is just a handful of things that you would at least suggest to a Chinese tourist that has to stay there for 2 days, and that, of course, can't even visit but a fraction of these individual places. What Rome actually is, I think I calculated, it takes 65 years of continuous residence to actually begin to sort out approximately churches, museums, palaces, fountains, the ruins, of course, like the various ruins, the various monuments of any kind, like there are the catacombs, there are surrounding Rome as well, outside of the Aurelian walls, mostly within, but also as a broader extension, like as the actual manifestation of such power, also in earthly rule, that is not replicable, right? There is no such thing that conceptually goes. There is not a place in China where it's kind of the same, right? Or that even without the distractions of the communist regime is the same. There's not a place in India that is in the same way. This is not comparable to, say, I don't know, Constantinople, right? You go there, it's just like an incredibly despoiled place. Like, we don't even technically know what was there or here, right? Rome is a continuous outpour throughout all the eras, and people do not really realize that, because for most of them it stops to the ancient Rome, or the Renaissance, basically. Like, they totally ignored that Rome was, for half of a millennium in the Middle Ages, the most important city in the entire West, at least in terms of size and actual material output. They do not know, 17th, 18th, 19th century history. They do not know the city. They do not leave it. They do not have an actual culture. It's not just about Rome, but all that derived from that, also in a broader European sense. I mean, the history of the noble houses of the city, the history of the various, of the Pope, of the papacy. How many people actually know the history of the church for real? Right? Not the few notions, all the conspiracy theories, or the YouTube videos, which Pope was the most evil, this kind of, thing for the mentally feeble. We're talking about actual education, actual culture, actual history. I mean, even in the elementary basics, hardly any adult that I'm aware of, has even, a minimal idea of the world, or why it existed. Right? Make an experiment. Even here I'm magnifying, of course, expression to match the greatness of Rome, which is, of course, impossible.